In 2989 of the Third Age, Balin and his expedition of dwarves successfully managed to retake Moria. For 5 years, the colony seemingly thrived, but in late 2994, Balin was killed by a lone orc archer, and shortly afterwards, the rest of the colony was trapped and massacred to the last dwarf. Yet the fact the colony survived 5 years was quite an achievement, especially considering the fact that Durin's Bane, the Balrog, was still around. So in this video, we'll ask the question: how did Balin's colony avoid the Balrog? Firstly, we don't actually know a huge amount about the makeup of Balin's expedition. In the 5 years the colony was active, they got up to a lot of stuff, rediscovering lost armories in the deeper sections of Moria, recovering what seemed to be Durin's axe and helm, and even finding Mithril. Although only 7 dwarves are actually named, the fact that several battles were fought, and that Balin styled himself as Lord of Moria, would suggest that the expedition numbered at least several hundred. So this wasn't a group of dwarves stealthily exploring their lost homeland. This was a well-prepared company that were willing to fight, mine, and explore the deeper places of Moria. So given what we know, it seems odd that the colony did not attract the attention of the Balrog. Remember, when the dwarves first awoke the Balrog, it was only a year before the Balrog forced them all to flee. When the Fellowship entered Moria, it took a mere 2 days before the Balrog found them, although the presence of the One Ring and Gandalf might have had something to do with that. And after the Battle of Azandal Bazaar, during the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, the Balrog was waiting just beyond the East Gate, close enough for Dane Ironfoot to sense its presence. So from our limited sample size, it seems that if something was going on, the Balrog was willing to investigate. Now, that doesn't mean the Balrog was omnipresent within Moria. Gandalf had explored Moria in the past and never encountered the Balrog. He was aware of Durin's Bane, but he didn't know what it actually was. Likewise, Aragorn had also explored Moria, more recently than Gandalf, but before Balin's expedition. Whilst he almost certainly didn't see the Balrog, he may have felt its presence, given he described his time there as an evil memory. So it was possible to enter and explore Moria without encountering the Balrog. After all, Moria was a big place with many halls, many levels, and with who knows how much damage that probably rendered parts of the city impassable. But as I said before, Balin's company wasn't small, and they clearly weren't afraid of making noise. If the Battle of Azandal Bazaar had attracted the attention of the Balrog many years earlier, then surely the smaller scale battle outside the gates when Balin's expedition arrived should have also got his attention. And if the Balrog was so offended by dwarves living in a city above him when they first awakened him, then surely he also would have been aware of the activity of Balin's company. Surely he would have wanted to flush them out. So what was going on to allow Balin's colony to survive without coming across the Balrog? Well, the first answer is, we don't actually know if the colony did avoid the Balrog in the end. All of our information about Balin's colony comes from the messages that were initially sent back to Erebor and what was discovered in the Book of Marzabul written by Ori. Gandalf quickly skimmed through the book, but even the legible passages were still heavily damaged. So while there's no mention of the Balrog playing a part in the end of the colony, it's possible that it did, and either didn't make it into the book, or it did make it into the book but was destroyed when the book was damaged. Notably, the final words in the book mention the drums in the deep. This is the exact sound that the Fellowship hears moments later before they end up encountering the Balrog. These apparent drum beats are so loud that they shake the very walls, and there's horn blasts that answer them each time. Now, while it's entirely possible and probably likely that the sound has nothing to do with the Balrog and was simply the work of orcs, I do want to mention that when the colony was destroyed, they weren't attacked by orcs coming up from the depths. They were attacked by orcs from beyond the East Gate of Moria. So perhaps the drums, physical or magical in nature, were the work of the Balrog, something like a signal to attack or something like a way to herald its coming. That being said, the physical evidence in the Chamber of Marzabul suggests that the final survivors of Balin's colony were destroyed by orcs. So even if the Balrog did play a part in the end, it wasn't responsible for the final destruction of the colony. Okay, so even if the Balrog did play a part in the destruction of the colony, and that's an if, there's no real evidence, then that doesn't explain why they didn't encounter it over the previous 5 years. Unfortunately, my only real answer to this is perhaps the Balrog was simply sleeping or hibernating or whatever it is that Balrogs do. I know, it sounds like a bit of a lame answer, but there's precedent for it. Before the Balrog was first discovered, it was hiding beneath Moria for over 5,000 years. It clearly couldn't have been too active at this time, otherwise it surely would have discovered the dwarves far earlier. It's also not off-brand for evil creatures to spend most of their time just chilling. Glaurung and Smaug did the same. So while we know the Balrog was active at certain times, it's possible that it spent most of its time in Moria in something of a state of hibernation, only awakening and investigating when it perceived potential threats. Remember, the Balrog was trying to hide, not to conquer. It was bad luck, and, well, greed, that led the dwarves to find it in the first place. After the orcs were mostly cleared out during the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, it's possible that the Balrog perceived its place in Moria might be threatened, hence why it was near to the East Gate while the battle was taking place, and afterwards it may have retreated to a deeper chamber to hide, concerned that dwarves might try to enter again. This might have been how people like Gandalf and Aragorn were able to enter and explore Moria without encountering it. And Balin's company might have been similarly lucky. Perhaps the Balrog was sufficiently far away and deep enough, or perhaps the activity of the colony was sufficiently minor enough to escape the Balrog's notice. Remember, while Balin's colony did explore deeper parts of Moria, they seem to have all dwelt in the 21st Hall and the Chamber of Marzabul, which were actually higher up in the mountain, well above the East Gate. So perhaps none of Balin's dwarves got close enough to disturb the Balrog, or alternatively, perhaps they did find the Balrog but were able to avoid awakening it, and perhaps that part of Moria became off limits. Whatever the reason was, I think the fact that Balin's colony survived 5 years, despite the Balrog's presence, suggests that the Balrog wasn't just waiting around for trespassers to kill. It suggests that one could live and even thrive in Moria without attracting its attention. It suggests that the bigger danger was the orcs, who were actively trying to kill you, rather than the Balrog, who was mostly trying to hide. Amongst Balin's dwarves, the idea of Durin's Bane might have become less scary over time, and perhaps they started to believe that the creature, whatever it was, had either perished or left. Of course, we know that wasn't true, and we know that there was a grim truth when it came to Balin's colony. It was always living on borrowed time. In the end, they were destroyed by orcs, but even if they defeated the orcs, the danger certainly hadn't passed, because beneath their feet was a ticking time bomb that was waiting to explode. The Balrog, sooner or later, for one reason or another, would have discovered them, and that would have been the end. No ifs, no buts. In that way, I'd liken Balin's colony to a mosquito that has landed on an animal. It might ignore them for a while, but sooner or later, they're gonna get smacked. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. If you want to hear more about Balin's colony, I made a 17-minute long video 3 years ago that argues why Balin's colony never stood a chance. To be honest, I think this video gives a good enough reason anyway, but if you want, give that video a watch. It's not so old that it has the toaster microphone. Cheers, farewell, and remember, Balin's colony may have failed, but it still wasn't as bad as the Darien scheme. If you're Scottish, you might know that one.